Today, we're going to talk about a topic that some of you might have heard about before, but I'm assuming most of you haven't. This was something that happened to the Minnesota Timberwolves during the early 2000s, when Kevin Garnett was in his prime. As everyone knows by now, when KG was on the Wolves, they made the playoffs a ton of times and had some great seasons. Unfortunately, besides 2004, they could not get out of the first round in any other year during that period. Most people think it's because, the Wolves organization wasn't doing a good job of surrounding KG with a good supporting cast. He had some good teammates occasionally, but during the majority of his prime, his teams were never really legitimate contenders. You always had teams like the Lakers, Spurs, Mavs, and even the Kings who were just a level above them for most of those years. And the main reason why KG and the Wolves never got over the hump was because of a scandal surrounding Joe Smith, the #1 pick in the 1995 NBA draft. Right after the 1999 lockout ended, Smith signed a one-year, $1.75 million contract. This seemed very weird at the time because according to most team executives, Smith was worth way more than that. He was only 23 years old and had a good couple of seasons under his belt. He even rejected an $80 million contract offer by Golden State in the previous year, which made no sense at all. Why would he reject an $80 million contract and decide to join the Timberwolves for just $1.75 million? The NBA thought it was weird too, so they investigated this whole situation. And apparently, they found out that Smith and the Timberwolves had an under-the-table agreement, where Smith would sign 3 separate one-year deals for very little money, which allows the Wolves to acquire his bird rights, which would then allow them to go over the cap and re-sign him afterwards. After his small 3 one-year deals are over, the Wolves would be able to sign him to a contract paying him $86 million. Okay, so for those who are unfamiliar with the salary cap regulations, having a player's bird rights allows a team, as I mentioned earlier, to go over the cap to re-sign them. This would have given the Timberwolves the chance to build a contender in a much easier way. If they did not get caught, they could have signed some good players until they reached the salary cap, and when they did, they can go over the cap and still re-sign Joe Smith because they would have his bird rights. In hindsight, even if the Wolves did not get caught, this plan probably would have failed anyway because Joe Smith wasn't that good in the first place. He still rejoined the Wolves 1 year later in 2001, but didn't really have a big impact on the team anyway. However, these under-the-table agreements between Smith and the Wolves were highly illegal. You can't just do something like this, it's against the NBA's rules. Oh, and the main reason they got caught was because of legal issues between some NBA agents, which caused Smith's under-the-table documents to be revealed. Anyway, the repercussions of this incident would be devastating. Commissioner David Stern fined the Wolves $3.5 million and also suspended their general manager at the time, Kevin McHale, for 1 year. When asked about this, McHale responded that he was not aware what he did was illegal. He said a ton of other teams do stuff like this all the time, but they just didn't get caught. And I guess that was kinda true to an extent. This is definitely a common practice between teams and players. So it's just unfortunate that the Wolves got caught with the documentation. But now here's the most important consequence. The NBA also took away all 5 of the Wolves' first-round draft picks from 2001 to 2005. But they eventually thought it was too harsh and changed it down to only 3 draft picks, so they lost their picks in 2001, 2002, and 2004. However, this would still be a huge setback for the Wolves franchise. Their superstar and one of the top 5 players in the league at the time, Kevin Garnett, was in the middle of his prime, but the team was struggling to build around him. The 2001 draft pick that they lost would have been around number 19 or 20. That pick could have been used to draft a guy like Zach Randolph, Gerald Wallace, Tony Parker, or even Gilbert Arenas. Imagine pairing a guy like Gilbert Arenas with Kevin Garnett. That would have been an amazing duo. Or instead of Parker and Duncan in San Antonio, we could have seen Parker and Garnett in Minnesota. That would have also been really good. But instead, the Wolves ended up with nothing. Alright, let's assume that the overall draft order for these years remain normal and doesn't change in this hypothetical situation where the Wolves actually have their picks. Now let's take a look at the 2002 draft. The Wolves lost their pick this year too, and they could have gotten someone like Tayshaun Prince or even John Salmons to fill their hole at small forward. Maybe Nenad Krstić or possibly Carlos Boozer too, but that might be a reach. Still, any of these guys would have been solid. In the 2004 draft, they had a very late pick, but they still could have gotten Anderson Varejao, a decent center. And even if they still had these draft picks and didn't want to actually draft any players, they could have still traded some of these picks for better players to help Garnett. Growing up and watching those Minnesota teams in the early 2000s, you could tell at times Garnett had to do everything. In some years, his teammates were basically non-existent. Besides that one year in 2004 where they had Sprewell and Cassell and got the #1 seed in the West, Garnett was pretty much a one-man show for his rest of the time there. His best teammates before that were probably Wally Szczerbiak and a very young Stephon Marbury. In fact, in 2003, Garnett actually led his team in all 5 major statistical categories: points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. I mean, just look at this stat line. That's insane. He also did this while being one of the best defenders in the entire NBA. It's a shame that this whole Joe Smith scandal had to happen. Garnett possibly could have even won a championship in Minnesota, and we missed out on something amazing. This scandal set them back for years, and up until now, the Wolves still haven't made the playoffs since 2004, 13 years ago. The Seattle Supersonics have been in the playoffs more recently than the Wolves, and they haven't even existed for about a decade now. At least everything worked out in the end though. KG got his ring in Boston, and now the Wolves look like they have a great young team that could be very good in the near future. And that's all folks, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later.